Welcome back to the Multifamily Mind podcast, superpowered by Salesmail. Today, we have a theatrical conversation with Justin Dilley, National Strategic Account Manager for MRI Software. You'll learn the value of good disruption, how leaders can foster creativity, and how encouraging creativity is better for your business. Let's get into it. Lights, camera, action. Well, welcome back to the Multifamily Mind. I'm excited for this conversation, Justin. I have been fangirling your content on LinkedIn for the better part of a year and a half now. And I love your approach. I love how you message. And I'm sort of going to your nickname in my world is the Creator. Oh. Because you're very creative. Your approach to sharing information is engaging. And so let's talk a little bit about creativity. That's really what kind of got our conversation started pre-show. And, when you say, let's use more creativity in the multifamily universe, what do you mean by that? Share a little bit of your insight.
Yeah, it's great to be here, first of all, but I mean, and I appreciate that you recognize some of the creativity. I think it is a way to engage on all kind of levels. Number one, it is how people kind of operate. And I think people don't talk about it in a way that they talk about other skills. There is some talent to it. Sure. There is some gut feelings to it and instincts to it, but being creative or applying creative, elements to your work or to your approach to stuff is a skill that you can hone and we can develop. And, in terms of multifamily, I think it by nature is a creative industry, which is probably why the people that I've ran into over almost 2 decades that I've been in it kind of have some kind of creative element in their background. And so it's just taking it and like kind of actually cultivating the people that do step in and cultivating that creativity in whatever kind of role they're in. Yeah.
I mean, so I know you've got a theater background. You're a theater nerd. I'm a theater nerd. A few people in the space, Christine Carroll at Opinion, she's a theater nerd.
Yeah, so Sydney Weber, Justin Jones. There's a lot of us.
Yeah, there's a ton of us out there. And, I see those people kind of stepping into the light, so to speak, and sharing their perspectives from a creative approach. I wanted you, in our earlier conversation, you did a really great job of kind of defining what you mean when you use that word creativity, because a lot of people will think, oh, I can't paint, I can't draw, I can't sing. But really, even though we've talked about theater nerds, that's not what it's about, right?
No, not at all. I mean, I think at the very, it gets labeled to that artistic side, or that left brain side. But really, it's just, the base definition is just, really putting something new into an existence. So, at the very first thing, right, is like all the founders in prop tech that have been in our space in the last 5 years, just by nature of what they do, there's an element of creativity that they start with.
Yep. So they identify an issue, a problem, a pain point, and then they begin to kind of have this like creative brain. What's the process like for you as you're in creator mode? And do you think that that's something that can be taught?
Yeah, I'll talk about it, like how people teach it, and what's sort of my process of it. There are books on this. There's books in university. There are books like on Amazon. There are different some webinars on it. It's not talked about in our space specifically, but in business. The business development and like corporate world, there is some like programs and stuff that help harness creativity. There's a great book called The Art of Creative Thinking, which I've read a couple times. It's by John Adair. And it is a very, I don't want to say scientific, but very kind of pragmatic approach to being creative. And I'll give an example is, it gives kind of tools of how to harness creativity. And one of the things that the book says is to challenge assumptions. That's like, we all kind of do it. And in some ways, like it's what we call disruption, or it's what we call, however you want to look at it. But that is, if you just say, hey, I want to challenge disruption this month, this week, this day, or challenge an assumption, what am I going to challenge? So you look at something and say, why are we doing it this way? Or could it be done slightly differently? Or where did this originate from? So, in our industry, we talk a lot about that. We talk about creativity without actually naming it. I think we do it. And some of us are really good at it. Some of us need to learn it better. But I think the more we talk about it, the stronger those skills will be.
So, do you think there's the opportunity no matter what role? So, if you think about a site team, you've got the service team, you've got the leasing team, and then you have the corporate support folks. Maybe we could talk about those three different buckets and give them some ideas from your perspective around how they might be able to be a little bit more creative in their approach.
There's lots of ways. So, I'm happy to throw out a few good ideas. I do want to call out something that happened in between our earlier conversation and this one.
Okay.
I noticed a director from Graystar posted on LinkedIn and shared about the creativity that they are astonished by when they go visit their on-site teams. And specifically referencing some of their vision boards or goal boards for the particular month or quarter or whatever it is. And there's a picture of something that they they created and crafted. And that was a very clear example of leadership kind of recognizing the way that somebody kind of puts themselves into it, or a team puts themselves into it, which is an element of creativity, right? Birthing something that didn't exist before, taking something and making it a little different. For on-site teams, that could be simple as taking a standard template, a standard of checking off the boxes and doing it slightly differently. Remember the movie Office Space?
Yeah.
So do you know the flare? Remember the flare? So it's basically really wanting to wear the flare and then making sure that if it's not buttons, what else could it be? So maybe it's another way of expressing yourself. It doesn't have to be buttons. So I think that's the key, is that you don't have to be creative in one specific way, and it shouldn't come from top down, but it should really come from bottom up. What exists within that person? Oh, let's support that type of creativity, because it's gonna vary from team to team. It's gonna vary from person to person, and so how you host a resident event, you could be creative. How you use a piece of technology, you could use it slightly differently than what it was intended for, but still get a result that benefits the ownership group, the asset manager, and the resident. I mean, there's so many ways of just taking something and turning it and doing it slightly differently.
Yeah. I love that. I love that idea. And as you were talking, I kind of think putting that into context from something that I've seen. So, a lot of people I think creativity is inhibited a lot in our industry because we are a process-driven industry. Mm-hmm. We've got standards, we've got fair housing, we've got all these regulations and protocols in place that I think can stifle creative spirit or make someone feel like, oh, I really probably shouldn't mess with that. But as you were talking, I kept visualizing. I don't know if you know Nicole Stewart or not. She's in the Houston market. She works for Quarterra Group, and I don't know if you've seen her post or not, but her team they are dressed to absolutely kill it. And when Chev came with his podcast, the Humans of Multifamily, he pulls up in his purple RV, right? Well, here comes the team, all dressed to kill in purple. And so, career apparel could potentially have stifled that piece of the puzzle for her, but she's thinking outside the box, obviously given some permission or some freedom to, kind of do what she feels is right for her team by her management group or by her leadership, which is a key piece, I think. But that's just one sample of how you can sort of just, it's not like changing everything, but it's like just a little bit different.
Right. And, I think the creative side is also a curious side. And so that's really where I think leadership has to step in, which is if you have a process, particular career apparel, you have a particular guideline, you have a particular flow of a tour, you have a particular way you want a form filled out. Two things can happen when those don't exist. Yeah. So the first thing is to be curious about it. right? So if you're curious about it, if you ask the question, so why did you wear all purple? Why did the team wear all purple? Or why did you do the tour this way? Why did you start with this amenity when we always start with this one? If you ask that question first, you may find out that there is a creative motivation for it. Or then you might find out there's a training deficit. And it's like, well, I didn't know. And so it's like, okay, that's work for us to do on our end. But if there is a reason, if you're curious about why something isn't in the typical flow and you see it from a leadership position, that's the time for you to be creative and say, well, let me dig a little deeper what's going on. And then I can figure out how to support that or not. Yeah.
And I love that approach. I mean, that's Ted Lasso in a nutshell, that whole concept of curiosity versus judgment, which I think is a great way to, especially when you're talking about people being creative and kind of doing things differently. I mean, iteration is a part of our business, and we've had to iterate, when we went through the pandemic, we had to iterate as an industry to be able to, sustain business, provide customers with a similar experience to what they were used to, but we had to approach it in a different way. And I'm hoping that, that time for us has maybe given permission a little bit more broadly than it has in the past to be creative. You mentioned the tour, and instead of going to the model first, I went to the amenity space. Well, based on what you're hearing your customers say, you should be doing that. And, I think fair housing has us scared into, we've got to do the same tour every time for everyone. And it really comes down to the customer experience and making each customer feel that it's a unique experience with you every time. Are you looking for a creative approach to your outreach for current or prospective residents? Well, I've got a simple and cost-effective solution for you. SalesMail. This tool allows you to easily record and send personalized video messages from your email, your text messages, or your CRM, even LinkedIn, and more. Book more tours, sign more leases, build better relationships with your current and future residents with SalesMail. Head to salesmail.com to learn more. How do you encourage folks to sort of, you've used the word disruptor a couple times, which I love. I love that term. And it's not necessarily a negative connotation. We should always be disrupting things. We shouldn't settle for the status quo. But how do you kind of approach that if you're, say, an on-site team member? How do you disrupt appropriately, or can you give any recommendations on how to have that creative approach with your leadership when you've got an idea to do something different?
I think one of the first ways, right, is to make sure it's, authentic or organic. Like, yes, disruption is good and we should encourage it, but we shouldn't do it just for the sake of disrupting, right?
Shouldn't
just kind of like AI, like, oh, I have to use AI, so I'll just use it. Like, it's gotta come from the reason. And I actually think that, the people that are on site are in a unique position. I mean, they work the hardest. They have they're the backbone of all of this.
Yeah.
But they're observing so much. And I think the first place to be creative is to figure out how to capture those observations that lead you to your next phase of, creativity. So the metaphor we have here, right, is that we've been using about amenities versus, on the tour versus a model or whatever. Like, if people are asking to see the amenity spaces first, somehow record that, somehow capture that somewhere so that you can actually go and say, hey, the reason why I chose this for my team, the reason we started doing this is because 70% of the prospects were asking to see these spaces. So we just made it more ingrained in the process. So it's taking tools that we all do that are part of the creative process that help you unlock creativity, and observation is a huge one of that. I played the piano for years, when I started when I was 5. And, I know the notes, I know how to play, I know how to do all that stuff, but there's a feeling and there's a style when you listen to somebody. So if I want to play like Ben Folds 5, right? Or Ben Folds, right? If I want to play like him, one of the best things I can do besides just looking at the notes is going to the concert and listening to the recording and listening to the recording. And that's the same thing with any kind of creative process. The more that you kind of observe, you're going to be able to execute that much better.
Love it. In the style of, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. What about when, say I have an idea and I present it and it's a creative approach to whatever piece of the business we're looking at, and my leader says, I don't think so. How do you deal with that? Because, part of the creative process is auditioning for something and getting rejected time after time after time. How do you deal with that?
I've had better times and bad times with dealing with it. I think that it comes with practice for sure.
Yeah.
But I will say first is, when you get a rejection, that's all it is. It is the thing that you gave thought to, birth to, life to, isn't right for this time and place. Yeah. And so does that mean it's something that you shelve? Perhaps, oftentimes true, and maybe rework. Does it mean that you go right back and fix something? Maybe there's a rejection, but a rejection with a correction, which says, I like this, but it needs XYZ. Can you come back to me with this? It's a risky process because there's no guarantee. You put yourself out there in some way and it could totally flop and fail. And I think that's why in this industry, the stakes need to, when you start doing this, you want to start low. Like you're not somebody saying, "Hey, I'm gonna try being creative for the first time by redoing the go-to-market plan for this this product." No, that's no, don't try that. But maybe I'll be creative in this conversation. Yeah. Maybe I'll be creative in this post on LinkedIn, or maybe I'll be creative in this email, where the stakes are kind of low and you're not losing a lot of time or money by trying something and then it getting either rejected by not having well reception, or your leadership says that's a silly idea or whatever. But when the stakes are low, that rejection feels less painful. Like if I don't get to wear purple for the tour bus, it's not the worst thing, right? It's like, it would have been cool. And obviously it was, because people saw it and it was a big thing. But if leadership said, no, we're not going to do that, there's no real harm there.
Yeah. But what I love was your to kind of backtrack to your earlier thought was, it kind of explaining, hey, the reason we're doing this is because we've heard or we've seen or we've been experiencing. So that why behind the what, I think, is really a necessary part of the creative process. Because again, to your point, you can have a great idea and you can just spit it out there and people won't understand, what the intention is, what the causation for this change was. And I think that is part of the importance of sharing that first before you actually present it. And, that may have an influence on whether or not somebody likes or approves or dislikes or disapproves, right?
Right. I think the why is the key, because I think that a lot of times people think like creativity is the easy way out, or maybe the more comfortable way of doing something, or it fills a need that someone has. I am a person that likes to hide behind a character if I'm in front of people. I don't like to be in front of people as myself. And so the past few years it's been really an effort to kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to put myself out here in some way, in some like authentic way that's me, to be able to talk about the things that I do. Not because that was easy for me or that I thought like, oh, this is the best way for me to do it.
Yep.
But I felt like it was it was using a type of creativity that I thought would forward some of my goals and initiatives.
That's interesting because, as an outsider looking in, kind of knowing your background, I would have never thought that you would be uncomfortable as yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an interesting revelation. And I think, it's important when you're presented with an opportunity where you're allowed some creative licensing or space to do things differently, to, kind of, acknowledge some of those feelings and some of those, I don't want to call it a shortcoming, because definitely that's not what I mean, but, those, I guess it's the imposter voices that we hear a lot,
Sure. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And, and so it's kind of working through those. And I think that why is important, because if you're able to talk about why you're doing it, then you're alleviating someone else's question, because they're going to fill in the blank. People are going to fill in the blanks that are not answered. So if you are going to be deviating or tilting something on its head or doing something, you better have an answer for it. You don't have to tell people, you don't have to justify it, but you should have an answer for yourself, because otherwise it'll be unstable. Like that's true in the art world, right? When people have done things that are really risky, the strongest artists have been the ones that had a real core reason of doing that, not just, I'm going to try to disrupt and,
Well, and they had a passion for whatever medium it is that they're artistic in. You can't just be Jackson Pollock. You have to, there was a reason why he was the way he was and the style he chose, and Banksy, all the different artists. It's interesting to think about. Let's talk about leadership for a minute, because, I've kind of had my head in the book, Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek over the last few days, and just kind of mulling around some of the thoughts that he brings to the conversation around leadership. And, the concept of psychological safety is important, not just for the purposes of creativity, but it is important for, I think it's important just for how to thrive together as a team and to create a space where people can speak their mind and feel comfortable doing so. What encouragement or what advice can you give leaders in order to really create that? I mean, look at Gallery Residential. You've got Melania Armenia, who's really, she's definitely she's got her creativity is part of what she does for them, right? Bringing art into the community, and she's really got a passion for that. But she's been given this environment where she feels safe to, be authentic, to try things different. So how do you, as a leader, how do you create that space?
There has to be space and time. This doesn't happen overnight, right? So it's creating that safe space over and over and over again. You think about any kind of, I'll use the theater, but this works in kind of a lot of different kinds of ensembles or groups. But, what happens in the rehearsal room, you have to move forward with the good and then leave the bad and don't talk about it again. Yeah. So if somebody really, if there's a heated moment, if there is something, someone really fails, someone falls on their face, somebody does something, it's gone. The next day it's gone. You take what the best of that thing was and you move to the next day and the other. And that takes a long time because, leaders are often trying to figure out personas and productivity and all these other kinds of things. So they can get in their own head about, Steve said this yesterday in a meeting. What could all these things mean? What could all these things mean? They may mean certain things for sure. But if you're bringing that into every single room, you're not creating a space that is safe. And therefore you're going to get less and less participation, less and less creativity. So it's being consistent. The consistency is huge with all of this on any side. Right. Being consistent in how you handle, failures and wins. And I think that's the thing is some companies, celebrate some wins. They don't celebrate others. Some of them highlight some failures. They don't highlight the others. And so it's kind of really, really thinking about that. And I'm not talking about meeting goals or expectations or, winning awards of certain metrics or kind of, business or things like that. I'm talking about interpersonal dynamics within a meeting or a think tank or something. Setting. Yeah. And what moves forward, what stays, I think being really clear about that and intentional about that is probably one of leadership's greatest kind of things to focus on to cultivate creativity. Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking back, I think you and I need to off conversation this idea I have now, a conversation around the theater of life and you talk about rehearsal, and I'm if we would approach our business the way a ensemble of actors approaches their production, I mean, people are allowed to try different things, different voices, different inflections. different placement of props, different settings, so that creative cohort of a theater company. I mean, it creates an environment where everyone thrives, everyone has a voice. We may not all agree, but there's a collaborative spirit that happens. And I think, there's maybe a possibility. I'm thinking of a session for us later, like the theater of leadership or something to that order, because I think there's a lot to be learned.
No, there is. It's a lot of balance. I think the one thing specifically with theater, which is kind of a more timely kind of schedule than any other kind of art form, right? You have a certain amount of time to get the certain thing to the performance. Same thing's true if you're working on an album and you have studio recording time, but usually you're going in with all that material and, but theater, you have specific space, you have specific time, you're bringing a whole bunch of people together. So you're dealing with their schedules.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, you have to come up with a product. You have to come up with something. And so one of the greatest skills is sort of like what to do when, what to focus on when, what to care about when. And some things you do have to just let drop and go so that the thing keeps moving. I think that's a huge piece that gets missed in a lot of organizations is, trying to carefully keep everything in its lane and keep everything kosher on all these but there's certain things that aren't going to be perfect and you still have to make it work. My freshman college professor, who's a theater designer, he's now passed, but he used to do design for the Texas Shakespeare Festival.
Okay.
He had the best quote that I've used in business over and over again. And he said, for the art of theater, he's like, the true art of theater is creating something with nothing. So it's really like if you have a chandelier on a stage, you could go out and buy a chandelier, sure. But what's better is how do you create something that looks like a chandelier that everyone believes is a chandelier, but it costs nothing and you built it. And I think that's the thing is with anyone in a space, any kind of company, developers, operators, obviously people have different budgets. Smaller companies are starting off on a shoestring budget, but what you should be doing is bringing yourself into it. What can I do with the least amount of resources that isn't breaking my back, that isn't bending over backwards, but that kind of process, that's a creative way of thinking, right? If I have to go from point A to Z, but I only have X number of days to do it, how do I do it? That's creative thinking, critical thinking.
Yeah, I think the two are very complementary to each other, critical thinking and creative thinking. Interesting. I think it's, I just, as I'm hearing you speak, I'm seeing the huddle at the leasing office, whether it's a weekly or a daily thing, that's kind of the producer giving you notes. Hey, yesterday's performance was great. Here were some things that I saw. And, that environment really does tend to create better actors, better shows, happier audiences. And I think we can take that approach to how we do business. And there's so many parts of multifamily where you mentioned it, there's development, there's construction, there's operations, there's marketing. And a lot of people will kind of shoehorn creativity to only the marketing team is the only people, they're the only ones that need to be creative. But I see opportunity all over the place for folks,
Yeah, no, there's so much opportunity to be creative. And again, to your point of what that environment is, it's if there's trust there, if there's some level of trust amongst your group, you're going to see more. You're going to see creativity happen more often.
Yeah, creating that safe space. I used to say, let people fail with dignity.
Yeah.
Okay, so that didn't work. Let's talk about why, and then how might we do it differently this time so that we don't get that outcome, right?
Right.
Which I think is very interesting. Hi, folks. I wanted to take a quick 30-second break so that I could say, I hope you're enjoying today's episode, which couldn't be brought to you without being superpowered by Sales Mail. I mean, really, we couldn't produce this content without them. Sales Mail is the easiest and best tool for sending personalized video via email, text, and CRM. So, if you really are enjoying today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you would visit salesmail.com so you can check out how our solutions might impact your business communications. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well. Okay, that's enough. Now back to the conversation. Do you think that creativity could have an impact on, turnover in our industry is amazingly high. And I think, when people feel more connected to their work, when they're given a space to show up, authentically and bring their full self to work and, feel comfortable in that environment and, they're provided with the tools and resources that they need. Do you think that has an impact on employee turnover in any way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are, without disrupting your company fiscal structure, by allowing creativity, you get buy-in and ownership from those that are ready for it. You're giving ownership of parts of your company immediately. It's the quickest way to get people, I don't want to say loyal, because people, I think in this day and age are really focused on themselves, and people, it's a whole different kind of world than my parents, your parents. People don't stay, usually at a company for 20, 30 years. But the choice to leave becomes harder when you feel like you're valued and you feel like you own a piece of what's going on. So if you feel important in what you're doing and that you're the one that did it, versus anyone else could do it, I'm just following the orders of whatever. It's hard. I mean, going back to the theater example, the most exciting things, I have people that perform on Broadway tours. I used to do regional theater. The most exciting things are the things you get to work on, the things you develop, the things you create, the characters. It's not coming into the middle of a run and stepping into a role and following the block. It's not that. I mean, it's great. It's great, and it's good. It's a good thing, but it's not as exciting, and you don't feel as connected to it as something that you've created or kind of grown with in some way.
Yes, I can see that.
I think by giving those moments of creativity, whether small or big, there's a pride to it because they created a piece of it, right? If I created something, I'm going to have a feeling about it.
Yeah,
usually positive, not always. I mean, there's things that I've done that I'm like, what was I thinking? 100%. That's part of the process. And so the more you do that, the more you feel safe about, having your failures, because there's going to be wins too. Yeah.
You don't walk without falling down a few times, Mm-hmm. I know we've kind of focused on theater because it's a great analogy and it's, something that we both have a real attachment to. But I wanted to speak for just a second on, you are an incredible storyteller. And for those in the listening audience who are not following Justin on LinkedIn, I really encourage you to do so because he presents information, sure, the weekend update is great and what happened in multifamily this week is great, but some of the insights that you share through your gift of storytelling, I think are really impactful, and they help people. People learn in different ways. Some people can watch a video and walk away and be changed. Some people need to, experience it, touch it, feel it, and really go through it to change. Some people just need to hear, and there's a lot of power in storytelling. And some of the stories that you've shared, I've commented several times on some of them. How does storytelling work for you in your role at MRI? How do you leverage that? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about how storytelling might parlay its way into what a site level team might be doing.
Yeah. So
surprise.
I'll work backwards on it.
Okay.
At MRI, one of the reasons that I ended up joining that team was specifically because they have an interesting story to tell. I don't know if I've done well enough telling it. I've almost been there 3 years. But the way that they've approached technology in the space globally was very exciting to me. The idea that the innovators in this space don't just exist from the Atlantic to the Pacific on our, right. Our 48 states or whatever, that they're all over. And so they've harnessed a lot of that technology. They've expanded their reach globally, and they've brought some of those solutions back in. So rather than recreate the wheel where we're all like, where China has a version of like this resident thing and then this, that, it's let's make this all more global, because that's the way the world's moving. I don't know if I'll see it, but my son probably will. Like, that's the way the world's moving. So that was an exciting story to tell, just in terms of like big, broad strokes. Sure. I knew that storytelling didn't happen a lot in our industry. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't see a lot of it. A lot of motivation, a lot of personal kind of stories, like personal kind of storytelling, which I kind of steered away from. Partially because that was something that I was like, I don't need to throw my hat in that ring. Partially because it wasn't where I felt most safe. But I also thought of like, okay, there's all these great stories to tell. There's all these great connections to be made. And one of the things I often do is just a structure, like a little tip of being creative. And this comes out of the art of creative thinking. So one of the tips of how to generate creative thought is just to take two things, like two different things, like maybe, and then like it could be anything, like pizza and like, renewals, I don't know, leasing renewals. And then look at what kind of parallels exist between the two. What kind of, maybe it's the way you divide it up, or maybe it's, how fresh it is, or how hot it is, or how long you have to wait for it. Or, that's just me thinking right now. I just threw that out there. I think that's it. But you basically take something and you start comparing and contrasting. And so I've done that often. One of the structures that I created on LinkedIn was, when I was looking to create content and the well was getting dry, I would look at what happened in history, on this day, right? So I would go back and I would say, what are the stories? What happened in politics and science and nature, whatever? And then if something intrigued me, if I thought it was interesting, if it wasn't a horrific story of tragedy or something of that nature, I would say, well, what can this relate to in our industry, whether it's in multifamily or just kind of, a broader business industry. And so I would create telling a story or creating those connections between that. And anyone can do that. Anyone can do that. That's a simple way to be creative. So as a leasing agent, just taking those parallels is a great way to learn to start connecting to people, right? Like if you know something about your prospects coming in, if you're near a university, you can think of ways to engage maybe content that's very university focused, but also highlights your property. How does this particular property support the greater university area or the city? Or, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think it's a matter of trying something and then trying it again. But the compare and contrast thing is a great tool to use, because you're not creating anything new. You're taking but you're taking two things that exist and then finding out the way that those things exist together or could exist together. And just that mental exercise will start getting creative juices flowing. And you may have a great name for a resident event. You may come up with a great contest to engage people. You may come up with a great marketing initiative to get more, folks in the door. There are a lot of ways that can propel you to be creative without just saying, be creative. Right.
Well, and one thing that I love about when you do that is, like, for example, this day in history, here's something that happened. Here's how the people that were involved, responded or reacted. And then you always bring it back to, so what does that mean for us? And you make a correlation, which I think is the kind of the cap end that makes it really, really impactful. I love your perspective. I love the way you can share information, because, software is software. It's dry, it's analytical, it can be very, very boring. And yet you create some hype. People want to know more because of you. You've been allowed to be creative. So kudos to your leadership for you the reins to do. Because I mean, it takes, I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and I kind of call it my CRM, and it takes a lot of work. It takes you time to think up, strategies and messaging. And, I don't want to just be posting content because, it's Wunch Bite Wednesday and it's time for me to post,
Right.
And you're the same way, but you've been given that space to be safe and create. And by doing so, you've now got an audience of people who weren't tuned into you before.
Right.
An audience of people now who are tuned into MRI perhaps, and you never know what could come from those connections.
Right. And it's really about those conversation starters. It's when you become a voice of something, right? A voice of whatever. I think I have a particular, I think to your point, I think I do have a particular storyteller voice in that space on LinkedIn in the industry. But people feel like I have been telling stories to them for however long they may have read or engaged with it. So when you run into them at a networking event or a conference or on a Zoom call that you just happen to be on, or if you connect on LinkedIn, you're already starting from a place of some kind of familiarity.
Yeah. And
I think there is a trust there. And that's important to me, is that that creating that trust, obviously, with the people I work with, like the leadership that I report to, that there's a mutual trust going on, but also to anyone that I interact with, like, it's the things that I'm saying I care about. And I would say the same thing about any kind of product that I'm talking about. Like, I'm not going to wax on about something that I don't care about. I can explain it, but the things that I do care about, I will talk about, that, like, with that kind of passion or that kind of information. So I think it's a valuable tool for people to find whatever their voice is. It doesn't have to be LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be words. It doesn't have to be. But I think starting a pattern of creativity can open up doors that you didn't think you had before.
Love it. And it probably will make your job a lot more fun. And it will make experience with your customers and your team a bit more engaging and desirable, right?
Yeah, no, it's exactly true. It makes it more fun. It also is again, it's like it's a different kind of gym. I do go to the gym, I do run outside, but it's like a mental gym. So when you're when you're exercising it in that way, when you go into a difficult meeting where you're trying to negotiate, a contract, or it allows you to kind of create the space of trust there, hey, let's back up 10 steps here. Okay, we're getting off track. What we really need to accomplish is this, and we're so focused on this. Let's not even talk. It's the process of doing it helps you in everything else. Completely.
Love it. So with that being said, one thing that we do here at the Multifamily Mind that's been pretty consistent for us over season 1 and now into season 2 is we use this word audacious in a positive connotation. Somebody who's audacious is fearless, brave. And I think when it comes to creativity, you do have to kind of flex that audacious muscle that maybe you're not used to flexing in order to create. What's a creative strategy or something creative that you've seen in our space that's been something that you would consider to be audacious in multifamily?
Yes. There's a lot of audacious folks out there.
Yeah, there are
audacious companies, that are. So, I was kind of thinking, back and forth. There's not one clear winner, but the most recent and probably the most aligned with maybe my background, it's actually somebody who we mentioned earlier is Shiv Gettu. And his podcast and his approach. I think there's a willingness. I think the creative side is a willingness to get out there, and to, my CEO often talks about, touching hearts and minds. Like that's in every single thing that we talk about, which is nice. I actually had a pastor that used to say that back when I was, you
wouldn't think of a tech
but our CEO talks about touching hearts and minds. And and it's a core value that I think is I like it.
Yeah.
And Shiv represents that to me. He is finding ways to touch hearts and minds. He's empathetic. He's curious. He's open. He's intelligent, and he's giving space for those things to be received in different ways than we didn't think of.
Right.
Is it audacious to rent a giant RV bus,
RV
bus tour around everywhere? That's audacious.
Yeah, it sure
I
is.
don't know if I would do it. I mean, maybe if I was 10 years younger, I might do something like that. There's a part of me that always wanted to, drive, Route 66 or hike the Lewis and Clark trail, trail or whatever. It's like, so there's a little bit of Americana that goes along with this, that initiative. Yeah. But I think what it's at its core is it's meeting customers where they are. And that's what we all talk about is on being on the product side, right? We're serving your customer, do what your customer needs. And he's literally just going to where his customer is, or are. So that's who I would choose as most audacious.
That's cool. I love that. And that's a great, and we'll link to, his podcast is called The Humans of Multifamily, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So we'll make sure we link to that in the show notes as well. We'll also be sure to give a shout out to MRI and how people can get in touch with you in terms if they have any needs for a software provider in the multifamily space. But this is I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I knew it was going to be a fun one, and I really appreciate your time. We had a good prep call, and I feel like we've really given our audience some cool things to mull around and marinate on, and hopefully we'll see some creative streaks happening at a theater near you. But
the leasing office is the new theater. There we go.
Yeah, that's it. I love it. Thank you so much. This has been Steve Wunch and Justin Dilley on the Multifamily Mind, super powered by SalesMail, the easiest way to send personalized video via email, text, or CRM. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Multifamily Mind podcast, brought to you by SalesMail, the easiest way to send personalized video via email, text, and CRM. To learn more, go to salesmail.com. And remember, always be audacious. Until next time, I'm Steve Wunch. Have a great week.